Hi, Katherine. Welcome to the Sisterhood.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to be with you guys.
Well, we are so happy. You've already endeared yourself to me so much just in the 5 minutes that we've been chatting before the
Oh,
interview started.
oh.
Tell everyone a little bit about where you are in the world and who you live
Yeah,
with.
I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I have two kids, 12 and 4 years old. And yeah, what else should I tell you? You tell
How long
me.
have you been married to Jay?
So Jay and I have been married 15 years, and yeah, we're hanging in there.
Yeah. Well, Katherine, we're so excited to jump into your story, and you do have a very riveting story. So will you just talk to us maybe about starting where you met Jay and then where your life went from there with him?
Absolutely. So yeah, Jay and I met at a small college in Birmingham, Alabama called Sanford, and we married and moved to Los Angeles for this just crazy adventure in our early married life. And Jay was going to Pepperdine Law School, which is in Malibu, California, and we had a new baby at home fairly quickly, 2.5 years into marriage. And then when that baby was 6 months old, and I'd been married for almost 3.5 years, out of nowhere, with no warning, no symptoms, nothing, I had a massive brainstem stroke due to the rupture of an AVM, which is a tiny birth defect in my brain that ruptured, and I never knew I had it. And that stroke caused me to have a massive surgery that would leave me extremely disabled after 16 hours of surgery. And then I would spend almost 2 years in hospitals relearning to eat and speak and walk and live, really. And yeah, it's been a wild, wild journey since then. I've actually had 11 surgeries since the stroke, and just endless, really awful stuff. Because my body is very broken. You can't see today, but I'm in a wheelchair full time. And as you can see, my face is paralyzed on one side, and I have a hand that doesn't work, and I'm deaf in one ear and blind in one eye, and just have a number of pretty significant health challenges since the stroke. But I'm actually shockingly doing really well. Thank you, Jesus. I've gone on to have another biological child. And my husband and I started a ministry for families with disabilities to have a summer camp. And yeah, we've written two books. The first is a memoir called Hope Heals, about our story. And the second one, Suffer Strong, is really the lessons learned after I had the stroke. It's kind of how to survive in the aftermath of something nearly unsurvivable.
Yeah. I do want to get to Suffer Strong, and we are going to talk about that today, but I do want to camp in your story for a few minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
Katherine, what was that like for you waking up and realizing that you'd had this massive stroke and life would never be the same?
Yeah, it was very, very foggy for many weeks. I couldn't really even wrap my mind around what had happened. I've never even heard of a 26-year-old healthy young mom who overnight could not even eat food, or had this. I'd heard somebody's grandfather had a massive stroke. I'd never known that it could be anyone, any age. So it was really difficult and painful on so many levels. And it was just emotionally just so difficult and spiritually complex as to where is God in this. And probably the most painful aspect above everything else was that my little sweet baby, um, I would see him when people would bring him to the hospital room, and think that, oh, good, now he's going to stay with me today in the hospital. I'll take care of him now. I was exclusively breastfeeding before my stroke, and he'd just been my little sidekick with me every moment. And suddenly he's being cared for by other people, and it was horrific. I couldn't wrap my mind around the fact that I wouldn't be his primary caretaker anymore from this. I just thought, like, yeah, it'll look a little different, but he'll live with me in the hospital now and I'll take care of him. And that obviously wasn't possible, but I couldn't understand that, and it was awful.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about your husband's response initially and then how that changed over time?
Oh, yeah. So obviously Jay was and actually continues to be just an advocate like nothing I've ever seen. From the first moments of me living, he just remembers knowing that since the Lord had spared my life, that he was really on a mission to help me get well. And that hasn't changed. And it hasn't been easy, but he's really been by my side for it and recognized that this is what God was calling him to, was to take care of me.
So it's so beautiful. I mean, it's just the faithfulness of a spouse like that. It's eternal. It just is. It has eternal impact.
Absolutely.
So, Katherine, what was your personal journey like as you started to realize the work that would be involved to relearn these things that you just did from the time you were a baby? You know, you just grow up and you walk and you talk and, you know, you eat and things like that. What was that like for you to have to step into relearning these things you'd always done and taken for granted, really, as all of us do?
Right. It was extremely difficult. It was, there were no shortcuts in my recovery. It was just painstaking to relearn everything. I spent 11 months not eating food and trying to relearn to swallow food was awful. I spent 18 months relearning to stand up and kind of hobble around with my cane a bit. And it's been an extremely long journey. And there have been many moments of just terrible sadness and darkness in it, which I always want to say when I share, because I think it's so important as a Christian community to recognize there is deep sorrow and sadness, and there can be a lifelong tenor of sadness. Everything doesn't have to be 100% redeemed on earth. We're not in heaven yet, so I don't think it is supposed to be that way. I think we're on a fallen planet. It is not a safe place. And one day we'll be at home, but we're not there yet. And for me, I think probably 6 or so months after the stroke, when I was relearning but unsuccessful at walking, eating, speaking yet, I wondered if God made a mistake, if him leaving me on earth was really a mistake he made, that I was caught between life and death and my body didn't work, but I was still here. And I can remember wondering if it would be easier if I were just gone, and that Jay could remarry a normal woman and James could have a normal mommy, and eventually everyone would stop being so sad. And even in those just horrific moments of wondering where God was, I think, and I do believe it was kind of a supernatural moment, and I didn't audibly hear God's voice, but I felt his presence in a way I never had before. And the truths that I had known from when I was a little girl about the truest things about God and about me kind of became the forefront story. That somehow, even in this, God was for me and with me, and somehow this was all a part of the story he was writing in my life. And in that really just sad, dark, near despair like time, I can hello? Oh my gosh, where does I can remember in my very darkest moments wondering if God had made a mistake with my life and wondering if this could be what God had for me. I was caught between life and death, and my body didn't work. And so I just couldn't see how this could possibly be part of God's plan for my life. And I think in that moment, I began to even wonder if God was even real, if he even cared. And yeah, just a lot of just darkness crept in. But what was really powerful is in that just terrible despair-like moment, I felt this supernatural, not audible, but through the scripture I'd known most of which from when I was a little girl, I felt a sense that was so deep that I didn't know the whole story here, and that God had something way beyond anything I could see in this, and that his sovereignty was so over my life, this story, that I may not understand what was happening, but I somehow know very deep inside of me that God was at work, and that God was for me, and that somehow all things are working for the good, and somehow that nothing can separate me from the love of God. And I can remember even rationalizing that I know Psalm 139 is true, that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And if I believe that, I believe that I was made with a brain defect. And somehow God knew that that brain defect is in there, and he is working in and through that. And I can remember thinking that Ephesians 4:1 notion that I needed to live a life worthy of the special calling I'd received, and really feeling almost the opposite of cursed or, you know, like relegated to this terrible story, but instead feeling very chosen, that that God has seen me worthy to steward something so hard while on earth, which is just crazy talk, except I then and now believe that that's totally true, that God is what was and is writing a beautiful story in my life. And in that story, there are painful chapters and seasons, but those terrible seasons of suffering are in fact what inform the good seasons. They let you know they're good because of what isn't in your story then. And it's really a powerful way to live your life, is to recognize that God's story is way beyond anything we can grasp. And when we can lean into that and really just trust that what he's doing is somehow good, then it changes how we view our story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the redefining and reframing what has happened. The contrast that you just used as an example, it's like when we say you can't see the light unless there's darkness. You can't see the good in your life, the blessing, unless you experience the suffering.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I love the notion of redefining everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the subtitle of Suffer Strong, our second book, is that you can survive anything by redefining everything. And I've had a deep sense that when my life became completely upended as a 26-year-old female, already walking with the Lord, that in the upending of my life, I was able to fit more clearly into the upside down kingdom and see the upside down kingdom more clearly because of the upending of my life.
I'm getting really teary as you're talking because it's only the Holy Spirit that would do that. I mean, I just, get really, emotional talking about it. But
Oh,
just
yeah.
because you had every right to despair,
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
any one of us in that position would be absolutely turned, our soul, our actual, like the depth of our soul would be turned upside down in despair. And yet that often is where God meets us the most, right? It is
Right.
actually
Yeah.
not often. It is where God meets us the most.
Absolutely.
And that in that place, only the Holy Spirit could reach that place in you. No person, no, nothing could reach there except the Holy Spirit. And then in that place, then he could deeply do this work in you that is so, I mean, it just encourages my faith so much because it's only the work of God. It is only the hand of God that can do that. Nothing else could have rescued you from that place.
Absolutely.
Well, Katherine, I want to read an excerpt from your new book, Suffer Strong. And I just thought this part was so amazing that I want everyone to hear it. It's not super long, but it's really, really impactful. Human suffering takes so many forms, and it can be tempting to rank what's worthy of being deemed real suffering. But aren't we all struggling to live with realities we would not choose? Suffering in its simplest form comes in the space between what we thought would be and what is. That tension can rock us to our core, whether it's losing a job or facing a tough medical diagnosis, experiencing a bad breakup or managing a financial challenge, suffering, depression, or losing a loved one. Our humanity places each of us on the spectrum of pains. And the great irony is that we often isolate ourselves saying, my pain is so big, no one understands. Or conversely, my pain is so insignificant, no one would care. The truth is, the experiences that feel most personal, like no one else could get it, are the most universal experiences in life. I feel like, and then of course you go on to say, that life defines us, but suffering redefines us.
Right.
And it's that whole idea of redefining. But I want you to talk about this idea of suffering, because this is so spot on that we often don't share our suffering because we think either no one's going to understand or it's so insignificant that it's not worth anyone's time to talk about. Can you address that?
Absolutely. I believe that we all have invisible wheelchairs. Some of us have external ones like me, but we're all walking around with wheelchairs inside of us, invisible wheelchairs that are holding us back, that we need. Everybody has something in their story that is not okay, that is really hard. And we owe each other such grace because what is most personal that no one can understand, we think, is actually the most universal feeling that we're all having, of just a combination of where we've been and what happens and what has happened in our past and what we're walking in right now, and just all of the internal things you don't see, from mental and emotional disorders of all kinds. And I mean, the list is so long of everything people are dealing with. So I've recognized that suffering is suffering, that pain is pain, and no matter what, it's happening all around us in different forms. And the quote that I say a lot that you referenced is that life defines us, and then suffering redefines us. And hopefully, sometimes hope refines us.
Mhm.
And in the refining process, we become more of who God has actually created us to be.
Can you talk more about the idea of suffering redefining us? Because sometimes I think women take on, I've experienced this pain or this life experience, and now that is who I am. And so can you talk about what that means when you say suffering redefines us?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's so important to recognize that suffering is not the end of your story. The story goes on, and suffering produces good stuff along the way that does, in the end, both redefine everything and refine us. It says, I think it's Romans 5, maybe 3 through 5, that suffering produces perseverance, character, and character hope, and hope will not disappoint. And I love the idea that suffering, because of the suffering, there is a different perseverance, character, hope, and that in that hope, you can't help but redefine everything, because everything's changed because of your suffering, and you can never go back to the way it was exactly before the suffering came, but you don't want to, because the hope born is so needed to carry on in your story. You don't want to go back.
Mm-hmm.
You said something interesting that I think is partnered with this idea, and that is that suffering is just a part of life. You didn't say it like that, but basically that because we live in this fallen world and we are not in heaven yet,
Right.
that suffering is kind of this thing that is just we all experience to some degree on some level,
Right.
as just a part of being human in this world. And that actually that is and can be the refining fire that actually creates something beautiful in us. Can you just talk a little bit more about how you've maybe, I don't know if it's the right word to say, gotten comfortable with suffering, but have allowed it to be so that the work could be there too, of that leading to that character, perseverance, hope?
Absolutely. I've heard it said before that suffering, when you allow it to, can become your great tutor in life. That suffering actually does have the power to inform how we live. I mean, suffering is what tremendously humbles us and lets us know that we're not in control. But it also refines who we are as people and changes our character and how we walk through life and how dependent we are on Christ, which is what it's all about. Is in healthy, able-bodied 25-year-old Katherine, I'm sure I really thought I could do it all myself. Even though I'd walked with the Lord since my childhood, I think deep down I felt very capable. And the reality is I'm very incapable today physically. But more than that, I have a deep recognition that I need God to handle life in many ways for me. 2 Corinthians 12:9, that in my weakness, he is actually at work and strongest, and I can boast in that.
Mm. How would you say somebody who is walking alongside a friend who is experiencing suffering in a new way? And we're the sisterhood, so we want to support each other in the joy and in the suffering. How would you say women can do a better job of entering suffering with each other?
Oh, absolutely. You know, the most meaningful, helpful people who've come along me at all different points in my journey have been the people who are willing to enter into the sadness with me. You know, it's never the lady at church telling you platitudes about, you know, the Jesus sticker they have to put on your bullet wound. What has meant the most to me is the people who have been torn up, that this is so hard and so sad, and I am so saddened for you. I can remember several years after my stroke, I had to have a separate brain aneurysm removal surgery. An unrelated brain issue popped up, and it was really hard to have to go through another surgery. And I can remember the day before surgery, a group of people at church gathered to pray for me. And a girl who was a friend, but not actually a very close friend, was there, and she prayed for me. And she sobbed out loud and just looked me in the eye and said, "I cannot believe this." And I can remember feeling so seen and cared for, and like, yeah, you're right. I can't believe this either.
Yes.
And it was so healing to have someone not try to tell me everything was going to be okay, because she didn't know that, and not try to say somehow this is part of God's story, which it was, but I didn't need to hear that then. What I needed was someone to cry. There is a deep ministry of tears, and we get to give that to each other in our trials and not try to fix it yet. And, you know, there comes a time in our story when there is a call to share truth. There is the ministry of truth, for sure. But that's not during crisis. During crisis is the time to minister with tears and to hold off on words. Less words are the best words, is what I like to say. That stop talking and just cry, or put your arm around somebody and be there, and don't try to make it okay. It's not, and nothing you can say will make it be okay. And so much more of Jesus and the truth of Jesus is in the presence and not the spoken words. It's being there and crying and feeling, and not trying to share platitudes.
Yeah. And I would say some women who maybe aren't comfortable being in that emotional place because they want to fix things or do things, that they may hold back from going and being because they're unsure of what to say or do. So you are giving them official permission to go and not have an answer.
Right. And it's worth saying that definitely plenty of women and people in the world are not wired to go and cry out loud because somebody's having a tragedy. Oh my gosh, I'm not saying that. Go and put your arm around somebody. Like, you don't have to be sobbing out loud to show that you care, but look them in the eye and say with your mouth, "I can't believe this is happening to you." In some way communicate, "I am with you." Show empathy and compassion and be with them. It doesn't have to be super emotional or not. It can be whatever, but a real exposure to, I'm not going to fix this, but I'm with you, and this means the world.
Yeah, the ministry of presence. I mean, that's just what that is. Just the ministry of being present with someone in their time of hurting and need, whatever that is, whether it's a big thing or a small thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Katherine, I want to talk about something that you talk about in Suffer Strong. This moment when you and Jay were speaking to a group of, you were at a camp. I don't remember exactly what camp it was, but you were at a camp. It was one of the first times you'd been asked to speak. And you talked about this verse in Esther, and that really changed things for you. Can you talk about what that was, and also just what mind shift happened for you in that moment?
Absolutely. So whenever you hear about the book of Esther, everyone knows the line that, right, of course, now I'm forgetting. What's the line everybody knows? Such a time as this, such a time as this. Everybody knows that, except me, evidently. Such a time as this. But when reading the entire book of Esther, you realize in Esther 9:1 that it says the reverse occurred. And you see in Esther's life and story that the exact opposite outcome to what she thought would happen happens. And that's true in all of our stories, and how powerful to teach that the reverse occurs in our lives because of Jesus.
Mm-hmm. And what did that mean for you personally as since then have ministered to thousands of women? And I know you and Jay do a lot together, and obviously you've started this ministry, but even that was a birthplace for you. So what did that mean for you personally?
Right. There was something very powerful. And I think that moment would have been like 2014, maybe. And that was, I think, really confirmation from the Lord that the reverse was occurring. That me being silenced by the stroke and sat down in a wheelchair and unable to walk on the stage and speak about my story and everything you would associate with getting to share. I can't barely see, I can't hardly hear, I can't speak well anymore. This is a different sounding voice than I had before the stroke. And obviously my face is paralyzed, my mouth on one side doesn't move at all. And I think in that moment, God was saying to me that the reverse is occurring, because by all those things happening to you, it actually has in fact opened up a platform to share about Jesus, because pain is platform. And when the worst occurs, the reverse can occur. That because, not in spite of the tragedy, but because of it, we are able to live lives with more of a focus on Jesus. And other people are looking, and we're able to steward and leverage our lives for what matters most in a different way.
Yeah, we have a friend whose daughter died, and she says because of the pain that she's experienced, people will listen to her talk about faith in a different way, because they know that she has walked through the darkest of dark.
Yes.
And so it is that redefining, again, that reframing of this opportunity, which is all loss when looked at from the world's standards, can also be gain by the kingdom standards.
Absolutely. And that always is the case throughout the Bible, and in all of our lives. We know well that God is at work somehow, and actually, because not in spite of what we've been through, we are just have a different ability to share because of what we've been through, more credibility or something.
Right.
Katherine, can you talk about the idea of how this produces true beauty? I think our culture is very focused on, excuse me, on beauty. How does suffering create deeper beauty in us?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about the issue of beauty for many reasons. One of which is that my face is paralyzed now. Another of which is that I'm a female from the southern United States, and gosh, just there's so much, just complex issues for women with appearance in general. But I believe that true beauty is about walking away from shame, which is such a powerful thought, that we have to ask ourselves, who told us the story of our own beauty, and why did we believe that story? And we can trace back almost bizarrely messaging we've heard our whole life that is not true, that is not from God. And in suffering of all kinds, there is this need. Not all feel this need, but the smart ones recognize their need to listen to his voice in a unique way. And in listening to his voice, there is a different understanding about beauty and appearance and all that is associated with that, because we're no longer concerned with that memorable message we heard from fill in the blank when we were a 6-year-old girl. We're listening to his voice differently because of the suffering, actually. It's really interesting how it's all so connected, that somehow suffering informs how we feel about our appearance. What? But I very much think it actually is all connected.
That is a really profound concept, that walking away from shame, that's true beauty. Isn't okay, that we could just stop right there. I mean, that is just, even that line is amazing. That is a really interesting thought that I think most of us have never considered.
Well, thank you. It's a chapter of the book.
Yeah.
Talk a lot about that.
Well, Katherine, what encouragement do you have, just as kind of last words, to women who are walking through a season of suffering, whether that be a big catastrophic thing or a small thing? What words do you have to leave them with?
Yeah, so many words always. I love the thought. Well, first of all, I should say, if you're walking through hell, keep walking. That's my first word, is keep walking and persevere in the walk, but get through it. And the beautiful things about seasons of suffering is that seasons change. You will not be suffering in the same way forever. I think that actually is a great comfort, that this is not the end of the story. Suffering is not the end of your story, but it's a chapter in a big story, and a good story that God is writing in your life. And specifically for me, the most encouraging sentiment I have to give, and that I was given, was the notion of Isaiah 45, verse 3, that God gives hidden treasure in darkness, riches stored in secret places, so that we may know that he is God, the God of Israel, the God who summons us by name. And I love the thought so much that not in spite of, but in the darkness, in the deep darkness we have to go through sometimes in life, there is a special treasure there that's stored only in that secret place of terrible suffering. And when we have it and get it and find that treasure, we get to keep it and let it inform the rest of our lives. And that is just such a comfort, that people who have suffered deeply have the opportunity to live differently because of their suffering, because they possess a special treasure they found in the darkness.
I see it in you, Katherine.
Oh,
I see it so vibrantly in you.
oh, you're so sweet to say that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being with us. And you really are a light in the world. So we are so honored to have you today. Thank you for speaking into our lives personally, and also to the women who are listening to this, because what you are saying is so important. And I keep going back to the eternal, but it's eternal. I think when we hear eternal words, we know them, we recognize them, and I hear eternal words in you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm blessed to be here.
All right. Bye, Katherine.
Bye-bye.
Bye.